Brian here with LongRangeOnly.com, and today I'm going to try to tackle a topic that I get asked all the time on various social medias, forums, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. People private message me or message me, whatever, asking me how I do load development, and I've been putting this off for at least a year and a half, trying to figure out how exactly I was going to tackle it. It is an infinite discussion topic. We could go on for days upon days upon days, and almost everything that I'm going to discuss realistically does require some kind of validation, or digs deeper into the rabbit hole, a qualification, if you will. So if you're watching this expecting me to qualify every statement, you're going to be sadly disappointed. I don't have time. I have decided that we are going to break this up into several separate videos, a series, if you will. I'm not going to number them. We're going to label them for what they are, and I'll refer to them in future videos, and we'll try to put links back to the videos that I'm actually talking about in the future. So, let's start with this one. My overriding favorite form of load development is doing a true ladder test. Now, I could point you in the direction of Creighton Audet's ladder test. A lot of the information, for whatever reason, is very hard to find on the internet. I remember reading about it years and years and years ago. I don't want to specify a date or time, I guess, because I don't know for sure. But I would say, 12 years ago I was reading about it. But some of that information is gone. So I have taken what I remember reading from him, and over the last 12 years or so, I have gotten it tuned to how it works for me. I'm not going to tell you it's the only way to do the test that he had envisioned, but I will tell you what I've learned along the way, and then we're going to get into how I do things. So, the first time I read about it, I thought, great, this is going to make load development super easy for me. So I went out and I shot a ladder test at 100 yards. It was completely worthless. The bullets were sprayed all over. I later found out through a different form of load development that rifle was very, very accurate, but at 100 yards I couldn't see the forest through the trees with the data. So I scrapped that, and I went to several other load development methods, which I will talk about in future videos. Again, this is about my favorite. So I kind of blew it off. It was later down the road, I said, well, we're going to go ahead and try it again. So I backed up with a brand new rifle. I threw some siders on target at 600 yards, got it kind of figured out. And then I loaded up 2 powder charges, 2 loads at each powder charge that I intended to test. And my intent was to hit pressure and have to come home and pull some of those bullets and recollect the powder and go from there. So that was where my second attempt at a ladder test. Okay. In this video, I'm not going to get into how you decide which powder charges, what seating depths to start at. I will make a couple generalizations in regards to those. Those I'm going to expect for you to already understand or know what you're looking at as far as a starting point and where you would expect to see pressure, or what to look for in pressure and when to stop. So I'm not going to dive real deeply into those. And while we're here at the beginning, I'm going to try to keep this more of a discussion type setting as opposed to very formal. So I'm probably going to bounce around a little bit because that's just what I do. So back to this second attempt at the ladder test. I chose 2 of each charge for a couple different reasons. I've seen guys do it with 1, and it can and does work, and I've seen guys do it with 3 of each charge, and I obviously know that that works, and there are still instances where I would favor that. But for a Magnum cartridge, I landed on 2, and I will qualify that real quickly. In my opinion, 3 is too much. It gets the barrel hot, and it takes too long to cool it back down. In the meantime, conditions are changing, and it will affect the outcome of the ladder test. You could say that 1 was better, but in my experience, I'll show you on targets here in a little bit, 1 doesn't always show the entire picture. Ranges of 450 yards out to 1,000 yards, and I'll kind of talk about which ones I prefer and why. But back to the number of powder charges at each weight. I wanted more than 1 in case I knew I pulled a shot. Now we're going to talk about that real quick, and we're going to move on. If you think that you pulled a shot, you need to be confident at the time you pull the trigger, not when you run down and check the target. You're going to become emotional, and you're going to try to justify why this bullet is not in the group. So if you didn't call the shot when you pulled the trigger, I wouldn't take yourself seriously. You're going to want to become emotional about it when you see the target. That's just human nature. So I chose 2 in case I did pull a shot. I didn't have to go reload it and reshoot it to verify. I, at the minimum, have to drive 20 miles out to where I shoot, and it's just not feasible for me to load up a bunch of different charges to verify something that I think I messed up. If you have a range right out your back door, if you live in the country and you've got a shooting range set up, I might be more inclined to do the 1. But for me, I chose 2. Again, let's go. The 1, I think, is a little bit misleading sometimes, and there is no room for error. 3, I think, for the purposes of a long-range hunting rig, most often Magnum cartridges, it gets the barrel too hot and takes too long to do. In the meantime, conditions are changing. So that's why I do 2. Seating depth, real quickly, I typically start 10 thousandths off. The lands, and most of my load development has been with Burger bullets. I've done some experimenting with other bullets, Noslers, Hornady, Barnes, but most of them have been Burgers, and I start with 10 off. I used to do at the lands because I would see the most pressure there, and that's where you would expect to see the most pressure, and I wanted to be able to find pressure at the same time I was doing my accuracy testing. But there were a couple rifles that flat out hated at the lands, and they just wouldn't shoot any powder charge well. And through later diagnostics, I found out that it was due to them being at the lands, and most likely it really was reloading practices. I was probably, and this is the case with how we check measurements to the lands anyways, it was probably off a little bit and in a little bit depending on which particular bullet was loaded, which was causing a huge variance. So 10 thousandths gives me enough room, and I have found since I've switched that it's been less problematic. I would say for a Burger bullet, 10, 20, 30, 40, somewhere in there would be fine to do this. Again, I'm sticking with 10. This is not going to be a discussion on seating depth. Again, just the ladder test. So, now I've qualified why I picked 2 versus 1 versus 3. And we've talked a little bit about seating depth as much as I'm going to get into it for this video. Let's talk about the distances. So at 450 yards, the data scatter of the shots is still so wide that you can't really see what we're intending to see with this ladder charge. That's exactly what happened to me at 100 yards. At 450 yards, some of the rifles that I shoot are too accurate to distinguish which load is the load at 450 yards. The other one, and some of these have just been shot that way because of the places I have to get set up and the places I have to get a target. I don't have perfect 100-yard increments. So The next one I've spent a lot of time doing load development at is 600 yards, and we'll come back and we'll discuss the differences here. I've also done a bunch at 875 yards, and then I've done a lot at 1,000 yards. And for all intents and purposes, 875 and 1,000 yards are the same, or my results have been the same. The 600 yards is a little bit different. So we're going to pick 1,000 and we're going to pick 600 yards, and we're going to talk about the differences between those. At 600 yards, I have gotten the data that I want. I don't know that it's quite as reliable at 1,000 yards when conditions are good. But the problem is, if you get a 10-mile-an-hour switching wind, I feel like the 600-yard data is better. The main intent of the ladder test as we are doing it is to find a real small vertical dispersion amongst several different powder charges, and more specifically finding a real tight vertical on one specific powder charge. And we'll talk about those in a few minutes. But we are also looking at wind, and when the wind is blowing, you can see aerodynamic jump on the target, and we want to try to avoid that. And you see that more, or I have seen that more at 1,000 yards. So if the wind is blowing and you absolutely have to shoot a ladder, I would suggest doing it at 600 yards. If it's super calm, 1,000 yards is going to be better in every case, because it creates a larger discrepancy between the good loads and the bad loads. At 600 yards, you could see 12 inches between good loads and bad loads, and then as that distance grows out to 1,000 yards, you might, I've seen the worst, it's not common, usually I would say 24 inches, roughly 2 to 2.5 minutes, but as a matter of fact, that's probably the largest gap I've seen. But it does make it easier to find the good and the bad. So, now we've talked about seating depth, we've talked about why I chose the number of shots I chose, and then we talked about distances. Let's get into what we're looking for, the meat and the potatoes of this. Now, there's a couple different thought processes here on what the data is, and this is one of the biggest hang-ups I've had for putting this video out. Obviously, we want tight vertical. It's the name of the game, right? At 1,000 yards or any long distance, the vertical is the thing that we can control the most. Wind reading skills are always going to be whatever skills you have, and they're always going to be the hardest part because of the terrain that we often shoot in. The thing that we can control the most is the vertical, and realistically that is what this ladder test is trying to accomplish, is tight vertical. Now, having said that, these typically overlap, but what I really prefer to see is a very stable spot in my ladder test. And what I mean by that is, often I'll get 1 grain powder charge, and we could try to correlate this to a case capacity or a powder capacity percentage. I haven't really noticed it, but when I say 1 grain, let's just go ahead and qualify that a little bit with, when I say that, I'm talking about 75, 80, 85 grains of powder. So across 1 grain of powder in those charges, I like to see somewhere around 1/2 minute. It won't always happen that way. It won't always be that tight for a couple reasons. Number one, the powder, or the seating depth that you chose to do the ladder test at may be the wrong seating depth. As a matter of fact, it's a very high probability that it is not the preferred seating depth of the rifle, and that does cause both windage and vertical. So I really am looking for roughly 1/2 minute across a grain of powder. It doesn't always work that way. What you will always see, if the combo is going to work, is you will see velocity increase, or the gap of the bullets on the target. As you change and you get into a node, they're going to shrink. It may not be the number that I'm after. It may not be that 1/2 minute across a grain. It may never even get to a 1/2 minute. But it's going to go from large jumps to smaller gaps. Whatever that is, that's where your node is going to be. I've been really lucky, or I guess in my experience, I don't know if you want to call it luck, I've at the most seen across a grain of powder. Again, in those powder charges, I'm talking about 3/4 of a minute, roughly 3/4 of a minute. And I really will start, so let's go ahead and stop there and let's walk through what we're looking for. I'm going to demonstrate it on this whiteboard. When I'm done with my discussion, I will show you a couple targets that I've pulled out so you can get a better picture other than just what's on this whiteboard. Alright, so I'll offer another piece of advice. I would recommend that you load up a couple ciders. I've done a couple ladder tests where I've been lazy just because I thought the lower node was not going to be my node. I didn't take any ciders and it's caused some problems. As a matter of fact, I'm going to show you one of those targets. It ended up working out for me, but I strongly encourage you to take out ciders to not interfere with your ladder test, and it'll help you see the data that you're trying to collect. So go out to the distance, kind of refer to what I just said. I prefer 1,000 if the conditions are calm. If it's blowing, 5 to 10 miles an hour, 600 yards may be better. I probably wouldn't try this much over 10 miles an hour. It's going to cause a lot of problems. It could make you misinterpret data, or just leave you scratching your head, or just ended up wasting barrel life, which is what we're really trying to avoid here. So go out, shoot your ciders, make sure you got your elevation. Now you're going to want to start your lower charge impacts lower on the target. At 1,000 yards, I'll use a 4x4 sheet of plywood, and I will paper the entire thing. At 600 yards, I will just paper 2 18-inch strips and go up the whole 4 foot so I can collect all my data. But what you're going to see, the classical ladder test, what you're going to see is you're going to make a shot of a low power charge. I'm just going to throw out some numbers here. We'll say this is a 300 Win Mag, and don't hold me to the numbers. I'm just trying to demonstrate what's going to happen. So let's start at 73 grains of H1000 and a Burger 215. Again, we're not talking about specific loads. This is just talking about the method, but I'm going to throw out some real world stuff out there. So 73 grains, and then you fire a second shot of 73.5, and then 74, then 74.5, and then all of a sudden you start coming in here and it gets real tight. So this would be 75, 75.5, 76.0, and then if you kept going and you didn't hit pressure, if you hit pressure, it can kind of collapse this, and you have to pay attention to when you have legit pressure signs. It doesn't always flatten off when you hit pressure. Sometimes it'll cause spikes. I hate to throw out a percentage, but I'm going to say roughly 50% of the time you'll get a velocity compression where it just kneels over and it hangs out there, but often you'll get spikes. So obviously, I think when everyone looks at this, we're going to know. I'm going to go ahead and label these 76.5, 70. Let's go ahead and say this was not here. Create a gap because this is more realistic what's going to happen. 77 and then 77.5. I think when everyone looks at this, it's obvious that the node's right here. Okay, now there's a couple things you can do with this. What I typically do is I'll go grab the middle of that node and I'll go do seeding testing. Most often, your node's going to be very near that. So I'll do a gross seeding depth test of 10 thousandths increments. So if we did 10 thousandths for this ladder, I'll go load up 3 at 10 off, 3 at 20 off, 3 at 30 off, 3 at 40 off. this should give you a half-minute load. And I should have qualified this at the beginning of the video. This is really probably a waste if you're shooting a 1-minute gun. I would say you realistically need a half-minute gun. Some would disagree. I wouldn't argue it, but I'm just going to assume you have a rifle capable of a half-minute. But when you're done with seating depth testing here, then you can do a couple things, and I would do a couple things. I would load up plus and minus 2/10 and plus and minus 4/10, and then I would shoot those again. I prefer shooting them at long distance, but you'll be able to see at 100 yards what the difference in accuracy is. And then I would also recommend going in the middle of those 10,000ths increments on seating depth. As small as 2,000ths change will show you on target at 1,000 yards. Sometimes it's in vertical, it's most often in horizontal, so that's another falsehood. People will tell you that when you're shooting at 600, 700, 800 yards, everything you see in horizontal comes from the wind. That is not true. Powder charge will affect it. Seating depth most likely is going to be the cause of it, though. So let's rehash. So this is the one. If you did one, this is what you're going to see. As you come into the node, it's going to shrink. And oftentimes they will, you might even see them be like the 75 may be higher on the target than the 76. What we're looking for here is a collapse in the vertical. Now I'm going to introduce a second shot because it's going to muddy the water a little bit. So if you shot a second shot of 73, maybe it hits here. You shot a second shot of 73.5, maybe it hits here. The possibilities are infinite, so I'm just giving you some examples. This is, again, one of the reasons why I struggled with making this video for so long, because there are too many situations for me to tell you how everyone's going to play out. But this 74 could hit here, this 74.5 could hit here. But in my experience, so this is also one of the reasons why I shoot two. We're going to go up here, let's say 77.5, say 77 hit over here, and then let's say 76.5 hit here. In my experience, when you find the node, we're going to stick with this target, or this fictitious target. When you find the node, the vertical between the upper and lower end of that node is going to be constant. So we could label these three however we want. The bottom line is the vertical of the node is going to be the smallest. So from here to here is obviously, that's over 1 grain. Again, it will not always work out this way. I'm just showing you best case. This vertical is obviously smaller than this vertical. Every single ladder I've shot, this has been the case. I apologize if I'm getting glare on this, so I'll try to make sure, that's one thing I'll try to look at when I'm editing this video. But this, the one shot will show you this. I think the two shot shows you better. The two shot also allows you to not have to go reperform the test if you messed up. So this is what we're looking at, and this is why I really like looking for the node as opposed to the single flattest charge. Let's break it. I'm going to go ahead and wipe this off, I guess. We're going to get inside that window, or just to exaggerate it here. So that was, I chose 76.0 on the top, 75.5 in the middle, 75.0 on the bottom. Usually, at 1,000 yards, what you'll see in the middle of this node is two shots like this. and then this will be something like this, and this one will be something like this. Okay? And like I said, in the last little thing I drew, I've been really lucky at getting that node to be roughly a half minute wide at 1,000 yards, but it won't always be that way. This could be a minute, and the rest of that target could be a total of 2 or 3 minutes. What does that mean? It still means that's where your node is, but you may have to tweak the seating depth to get it to come down to that half minute, or you may have to that rifle or that combination may not just be capable of producing that wide of a node. And sometimes that's the case. Now, the other part of this is a couple times, and I'm going to show you one of the targets where no matter what I really did, I couldn't get that magic half-minute node across the grain. What ended up happening is I ended up loading between, it wasn't this load, but I ended up loading right in here. So in this case it would be, let's call it 75.2 grains. This is where that was. The node was about 3/4 of a minute wide, but in here it consistently maintained a 1/4 of a minute vertical out to 1,000 yards as long as I've shot it. And it very well could be this one, it could be in here, it could be in here. I have seen a couple where this or this was the most accurate powder charge, bar none, most accurate powder charge. I would never run those, never. I would run in the middle here where I maybe lost a little bit of accuracy, but I knew it was stable. What I've seen every time I've gone down the rabbit hole of testing one of these is if the conditions change, whether it be hot or cold, and this doesn't matter, even if it's a extreme powder from Hodgdon, I've seen it, when the conditions change, it'll go into what they call a scatter node. You've heard a lot of people refer to scatter node, no doubt. It'll start getting vertical a lot more than this would. It may look good on the day you tested it, and it may look good the next day, and it may look good in 3 months at the same exact conditions, but I've seen too often where when the conditions change, it starts getting vertical. So I would never choose that. I would always load somewhere in between these, whether it be right in the middle or favoring one or the other. That's where I would go. So I think that pretty much sums up how I go about this test. I'm going to jump in here and show you some pictures. Like I said, this is just talking about how I do my ladder test. I'm going to do a series of other methods I've tried, and then the optimal charge weight we're going to do down the road too. I really like that. It's worked out very well for me when I shoot in crop fields, so if it's raining, or it's raining for 2-3 weeks at a time, and I just can't drive through the hay field because the farmer doesn't want me to, because he doesn't want ruts. I totally understand that. Also, through plowed fields, obviously can't drive in those when it's raining. So, alright, so here's a 600-yard ladder on a 300 Win Mag with a 215 Burger. This was one of my earlier ones where I was still doing 3/10 of a grain increments. I've since gone to 5/10, and I have found it to be just as accurate as at finding the node as the 3/10, and it uses less bullets. So here we got 74.8, 75.1, 75.4, and then you can see they jumped up here to 75.1, 75.7, and then you've got a 75.4 up there. So you can see how differing, I guess, from some of the things you see on the internet. Just because you load up to the same charge, like, let's go back here. So you loaded up
we loaded up 2 of each of these, they're not going to magically hit at the same vertical dispersion. If it was that simple, we wouldn't need the ladder test. If they always landed at the same elevation, then we could just load up whatever we wanted and go shoot at 1,000 yards, and we would have no vertical. But that's just not how it works. So you see the jump here. And I talked about this when we were looking at the whiteboard. But here you can see the node come into play, and you can also see this doesn't happen to me often, but this is one of the reasons why I shoot 2 per charge. You can see up there, that was me. And when the trigger broke, I was high and right on the target, more right than high, but you can see it there. But we come back in here to the node, and you can see 76.0, the 176.3 that I didn't mess up, and the 76.6 grains. They're all 1.75 inches of vertical at 600 yards, which is exactly what I'm looking for personally. Now, what I ended up doing was loading up a bunch of that 76.3 and go verifying and doing seating depth testing. I don't remember off the top of my head where the seating depth test led me to on this rifle. I want to say it was 35 thousandths off. It doesn't matter. You can see that we went from a huge vertical, roughly from peak to peak, roughly 2 minutes, down to under a quarter minute of vertical. Okay, and then it started climbing again, and then we came into a second node, and a lot of people may get emotional about that because it's going to be higher velocity. I did explore that node. That node just didn't play out. It wasn't as accurate, and I wasn't willing to lose the accuracy or the vertical just to get a little more velocity. Right in the middle of that node there, which was the 77.2, like I said, there was one. It just wasn't near as accurate as this one down here. And you can kind of see that on this target. But once I grabbed the middle charges and we went out and retested, it just wasn't as accurate as this. So that's one target. We'll go ahead and take another look at a different one. Okay, here we're going to take another look at a different target. And I'm going to touch on a couple things I forgot to talk about. One, I've tried the coloring pin option. It hasn't worked out great for me. I've lost a couple of the bullets. Couldn't tell which one was which, so I've stopped doing that. If you can't drive down to your target, it's probably better to go ahead and do the colored and just try to find some white butcher paper or something. But what I do is I just shoot 2 and go mark it. And this one I did in a round robin. So we're going to start. I actually just bounced around, but we're going to start here at the bottom. So you got 82. You got an 82.5 clear at the upper left of the screen. You got another 82 up here. Okay, then go back down here. Actually, I guess you only have 182 because I messed up and didn't dial when I fired that. So it turned out it didn't matter for me. So you got the 82, then you got the two 82.5s. Okay, and then you got 83, 83.5, 84 right there. And then you got the second shots of those up there. And you can see this was at 850 yards, so you have well over a minute there. And then they jumped up a little bit to you got your 284.5s, your 285s, and your 285.5s. Again, these were just shot. They were shot consecutive. Like I shot both 85.5s at the same time, but I did not shoot the powder charges consecutively. So it might have been 85.5, and it might have been 82, and so forth. But you can see right here on this target why I would never choose that 84.5. I've tried it before, and the jump between the 84.5 to the 84 is huge. So what I've seen is, in this case, typically when it gets colder, even though you're using a Hodgson Extreme powder and the velocity doesn't change much, it comes out of tune when it gets cold and you get huge vertical. I've done it 3 or 4 times. I'm not going to try it anymore. If you want, go for it. But I have found success in staying within the middle of that node. So right there, those 6 shots at 850 yards were just over 2 inches. That ended up being 85.5 or 85.0 grains. This was with a Sierra Match King, the new 200 grain Sierra Match King, not the older one with H1000 and a 30 nozzler. And this was one of the most accurate loads I've ever had. I just didn't like what I saw in performance of the bullet on game. So, you know, not a lot of data, but I didn't like what I saw, so I'm going back to the 215s. But that's not the point of this. You can see right there. And like I said, since I forgot to tell you while we're looking at the whiteboard, that the best way is to mark it with color on a white paper for a couple reasons. One, it saves you the time of driving down there, and two, because you save the time driving down there, the conditions have less time to change. But I've lost some bullets that way, and I just choose to do this method. So I'll shoot 2, go mark, shoot 2, go mark. So this is another target. Let's go ahead and take a look at a third target, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay, so this is a demonstration of why you always want to bring sighters. So this is my 4th 30 nozzler, and I got a little cocky with thinking I knew where the node was going to be, and I didn't want to shoot this lower node, so I didn't really give it the effort I should have. So I shot 83.5 grains there at the bottom, and I really didn't like where it impacted, so I went ahead and dialed 1 minute up, and I've marked that right there in the center of the screen. And then I shot another 83.5, and you can see it right there. Then I shot to 84. No, sorry. Then I dialed 10 minutes to the left because I was a little bit afraid the wind was starting to pick up, pushing to the right. I was a little afraid I was going to push off the target. So I dialed 10 inches or 1 minute to the left and shot those. I just marked over there where their impacts would have been, so I could compare them. That was done after the fact, after the ladder test was over, just so I could compare them. So I wanted to get more into the center of the target, so I dialed another minute to the left, and then I fired. Let's find them here for you. 2 84.5s, one right there by the tape, and then the other one was up there. Okay, and like I said, we'll go ahead and move through the ladder, and then I'm going to come back and look at that. So then we shot the 85. We shot the 85.5, and you can see the vertical starts to open up. I shot an 86.0 up there. I jerked that one to the left. Again, I'm gonna rehash on this. This needs to be something you called back at the rifle. You can't get down here and try to justify a bad hit with emotions. So I did call that. I called it to the left, and it's exactly where it landed. Okay, then you got 2 86.5s in the same hole. I'll come back to that in a second. And you got 2 87.0s. A lot of guys are going to want to get emotional about those. They're not going to work out because look where the 86.0. We could argue that that one may not be valid because I did pull it to the left. I don't think I jerked it up in elevation. But you got the 86.0 there. That was good. And then you can look over here. There's roughly half minute between the 86 and the 86.5. And then you've got another 3/4 of a minute up to the 87. So that's a total of roughly 1.2 minutes. That's not going to work out. Don't get emotional about that tiny group. It's not going to work out. So we'll come back here. So I went back and I remarked it. Now the vertical between the total group, the 84.5, was roughly 3/4 of a minute. And this shows a lot of things. So we're going to talk about this here for a minute. Number one, you can see that as the charge went up, it didn't just do the magical climb that we all like to think of when we think about a ladder. That one is lower than the others. This is what I see often when you're around the node. It'll encompass the other ones. So one more reason why I like to use two. So if we just shot one, it's very possible that we would have threw it out because we might have shot that upper one. And when we shoot them both, we can see the bigger picture, in my opinion. And this is played out in all of my load development. So anytime I see this, you see the 83.5s and the 84s right there had very little vertical dispersion. This load ended up being, with brand new brass and H1000, 83.7 was the initial load. So I'm going to go ahead and set the camera down here again, and we're going to get back in front of the camera and talk about it some more. So like we were just talking about, you're not going to magically see that step, 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 step every time. And you're not going to see two do this with the same powder charge, same powder charge, same powder charge. As the powder charge increases, each individual powder charge is going to have more vertical. It's very possible that a lower or a higher charge will impact higher or below the other one, opposite of what you might think, which is another reason why I like to shoot two. We just saw that on the target I just showed you, so I hope that makes sense. Another thing I want to discuss before we wrap this up is chronographs. They're not needed. The point of the ladder is to show you the load through the vertical dispersion on target. However, they are a great tool. They will help you, I guess, validate what you were seeing on the target. Now, if you don't use one, you're going to have to grab, so once you find your node, you're going to have to go inside that node, go shoot that, and you're going to get a velocity. And then, like I talked about on that last target, we're going to talk about one thing. What I will do out of a brand new fresh barrels, I'll go shoot clean, shoot clean, shoot clean. I'll put those all on target, and I'm looking for nodes. That doesn't always work out, so I don't get hung up on it. But if you will put those first 10 on target, and they're all within a minute of each other, you know the gun's going to shoot, and that load's probably going to work. But just because it doesn't stay in that 1 minute range doesn't mean that's no good. But it will give you data if it proves it, or if it shows that it's all under a minute. It'll help you down the road with feeling more confident about what you're going to see on the ladder test. But I'll shoot one clean for the first 10 rounds, kind of looking for nodes, kind of looking at what the velocity is going to do, and then I will go ahead and do my ladder test. Load up a couple siders. You've seen what happens if you don't, which I've made some mistakes and not done. But load up your siders, and then here's what I've seen when I do my ladder. So I shot one, clean one, shot one, clean one. Now the barrel's got 10 rounds on it. I load up my ladder. I load up 3 or 4 siders. I take it out to 1,000 yards. I get it on paper with my siders, and now I'm going to do my ladder test. So brand new brass, brand new barrel, and when we're done with this, we're going to have roughly 25 rounds on the barrel. Okay? And this is also one more reason why I prefer powder charge before seating depth. So shoot one, clean one for 10 rounds. Go do some siders, do my ladder. Now we got 25 rounds on the barrel, roughly. And I have a node that my target showed me, just like the one we just saw. That was right at 25 rounds on the barrel. Okay, so I take that load, that node, and I get a velocity on it. If you used something like a lab radar when you did the ladder test, then you'll know the ladder
the node velocity. I really don't recommend using a magnetospeed for a ladder test because it can interfere with it. If you use a lab radar when you did the ladder test, then you'll have a velocity. If you didn't, you can use a lab radar or magnetospeed now to get your velocity for that node. So, we're going to talk about that last ladder test you just saw. That node was at 3,000 foot per second. Okay, that was with new brass, new barrel, 3,000 foot per second. Now this is played out every single time I've checked it. That was with brand new brass. And I don't really want to talk about powder charges. I don't want you to repeat and go out there and just grab my powder charge and think it's going to work for you. That was a custom throated rifle. It was a low node, so probably you'll be okay. But this is not about you copying my load. But that was 83.7 grains of H1000 with a 215 burger seated 40 thousandths off the lands at 3,000 foot per second with brand new brass. When I took that same load and put it in once fired brass, the velocity went up to, I don't remember exact numbers, that's not the point of this, 3,030 foot per second, 3,040 foot per second, and it had a lot of vertical. That happens every time I've tried this, which is why some people suggest you start with once fired brass. Here's what you do, and it's worked for me every time. Back that powder charge down until you're back at 3,000 foot per second with once fired brass. And I don't remember the exact numbers with this particular rifle. I want to say it went from 83.7 to 82.7 grains of H1000 to get me back at 3,000 foot per second. And my vertical went back down to averaging under half minute. Most of them were closer to quarter minutes, but we'll just stay under half-minute vertical. Okay, so that's one problem I've heard people talk about. Old brass, or once fired brass, twice fired brass, 3 times fired brass, whatever, versus brand new. This ladder test shows you the velocity node. I have never seen it leave. I've heard of guys say that sometimes it'll speed up and the accuracy will ride out. I'm not going to say that's not true. I've just never seen it. So, the brass issue, back it off and get back at that velocity. You are obviously going to have to get your velocity of the node before you switch to once fired. And you're also going to need to get it before the barrel speeds up, which is the second topic we're going to talk about here in a second. That happens anywhere from 75 rounds to, I've seen it around 150 rounds. Some of that's going to depend on the chambering, how overboard it is, what powder you're using, whatever. But we need a node before that in order for my method to work, or what I'm telling you about right now in order for it to work. Now you've got the once fired brass backed off. In this case, we're going to call it 82.7. Now, I shot this rifle over a lab radar as the barrel was speeding up, and I could see the velocity. At first, it didn't just change exactly. It started getting really bad extreme spreads and standard deviations. But as I shot at 10, 15, 20 more shots, the average velocity was increasing. It finally topped out or stopped at 3,040 foot per second. Pretty much the same thing as when I went from new brass to once fired brass. All I did was back it off, and I know for a fact that I backed this off down to 81.7 with that specific lot of powder. And I got right back down to 3,000 foot per second, and all was good. My vertical went back down to under half minute out at 1,000 yards, and then obviously anything inside of that was the same or better. But I have never seen that not work. So I don't know to tell you if it doesn't work for you. I don't have an answer. It's worked on every single, even on, so the 60-ish barrels rifles I've done load development for, the speed up has always been an issue. I've always just backed off to the powder charge, or not to the powder charge, to the velocity that it was accurate at before. Whether I did an optimal charge weight, whether I did what I would consider the classic method, or the ladder test, I've just backed off velocity to where the node was, and it's worked for me every single time. New brass versus once fired brass, that seems to be hit and miss on the cartridges that changes for me. The bigger cartridges, 300 Win Mag, 30 Nosler, 300 PRC, I've seen that change where I've had to back off powder charge to get back to the same velocity and the same accuracy. Things like the 6.5 PRC and the 6.5 Creedmoor, I haven't seen that. But just know that it's there, it's a possibility, and like I said, once you've found the node using this test, it's going to be there. If you are doing this ladder test after the barrel speed up, and you're doing it with already once fired brass, then none of what I just talked about is going to be an issue for you. I think that wraps up everything I wanted to talk about in this video. Again, this wasn't meant to be as formal as some of our reviews. It's meant to be more of a discussion thing. I will answer questions on the forum. When they get to be too much or too in-depth, we'll just move on to the next video in this series. Like I said, they're not going to be labeled. We'll talk about them with the title of the video. So, as I alluded to, there will be a thread on the forum where we can discuss this. We will have a link in our description for that. If you're not a member of longrangeonly.com forum, go ahead and sign up. It's quick, it's easy. We would love to have you. There's a lot of information. Maybe there's some information you can share with us. Please like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and turn on notifications. That way you can get the future ones, not only in this series, but all of our videos. And thanks for taking the time to watch. Have a great day.